And I'll talk about this a little later, but Proverbs points us to Jesus. If we read Proverbs, and if we do a study in Proverbs, and we don't end up talking about Jesus, then we have done something wrong. Because remember, Jesus, after he raises from the dead, speaks to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And he has pretty harsh words for the disciples who did not understand that the Old Testament spoke about him. And Paul in 1 Corinthians 1, speaking about Jesus, verse 30, he says, "He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, whom God made our wisdom and our righteousness." So if we talk about wisdom and we don't talk about Jesus, again, we have failed. So I love wisdom literature because it's very practical. So obviously the first thing we talk about is the genre. Both Ecclesiastes and Proverbs are in the wisdom literature genre. And this genre informs a person as to the principles of God's moral universe. In other words, God is the moral legislator who has given us laws, moral laws. He has put them inside of us and he's put them in his word. And according to the book of Proverbs, there are only two types of people. Wise people who live in accordance to these moral principles, and fools who don't. If you read Proverbs, there is no middle ground. There is no middle ground. Either you are wise or you are a fool. So the wise person is one who lives his or her life in accordance, in harmony with these principles. Now, my side of the commentary, what I do, I start with what does the Old Testament say about a certain topic. So I'm going to introduce the topics this morning. But for example, we start with the fear of the Lord. What is the Old Testament? So we don't start in Proverbs, because the fear of the Lord does not start in Proverbs. It starts in the law. So in other words, whenever we do a word study or a phrase study, we have to start at the beginning. So I talk about how the fear of the Lord is treated in the Old Testament first. Then I go to the New Testament. Then I go to the book of Proverbs. And then I'm trying to have almost like an illustration from church history in each chapter. And this is where you guys can come in and help me out. If you know some lessons from church history and you think, hey, I remember George Mueller, for example. If I'm talking about generosity, you got to mention George Mueller from church history. Or any other things like that, please contact me and let's do lunch and we'll talk about that. But I'm putting the finishing touches on the commentary, and some of those parts are not finished. But I'm planning to finish it this summer. And then, of course, I close with a Christological reading. How do we read Proverbs in light of Christ? Again, we're not Old Testament prophets or Old Testament sages. We are Christian pastors. We are Christian preachers, and we fail if you preach and teach any text from the Old Testament and we do not make it to Jesus and show how Jesus is really the answer to anything that we're talking about, even the fear of the Lord. So I have about an hour to introduce the topics that we chose. So the first one is the fear of the Lord. And one thing that this commentary will have that the other one didn't have is a bunch of charts and graphs that originate with Logos. For those of you who don't have Logos, if you're a pastor and don't have Logos, they have some amazing resources. And what I'll show you here is how to use these even in your sermons, because I found them very useful. Because a lot of times I hear sometimes sermons where people say, oh, this word in Greek or in Hebrew means this. And I'm like, yeah, it can mean that, but it can also mean 5 other things. So be very careful not to do that, to say, oh yeah, that's what it means. So like, no, it can mean that, but we have to look at other things, like context, as you very well, very, very well know. So I love the Old Testament because it's so huge. I can teach it for 100 years and I'm still not gonna finish teaching it or learning from it. And again, one of these topics that I learned a lot about is the fear of the Lord. And again, it does not originate in Proverbs, it originates in the law. Moses says to the generation who enters the promised land in Deuteronomy 10:20, "You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear." See, there's always a practical side to wisdom literature, and there's a practical side to the fear of the Lord. It's not just to fear the Lord, fear and serve him. See, the fear of the Lord is not the fear of men. When you fear someone very greatly, sometimes you become paralyzed because of fear. That's not the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is, I know that God can zap me like this, but that doesn't paralyze me. It makes me draw closer to him in awe. And that's what wisdom is. Drawing closer to the God that's not just the creator God, but the God who's the moral legislator who put these laws within us. The fear of the Lord is always very, very practical. Job, how does Job start? You remember how Job starts. Job is synonymous with suffering, but what does he do? He fears the Lord and turns away from evil. It's very practical. The fear of the Lord leads us to action. Again, Moses says it leads us to serving God. Job, he moves Job to turn away from evil. And that's why it's very important, because we have people in our congregations that might be smart, they might be business savvy, but if Jesus Christ is not the Lord and Savior, they cannot be wise. Because wisdom starts with the fear of the Lord. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord. And according to Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is attainable. Having the fear of the Lord is not away from our grasp. That's what Solomon writes. "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." That's Proverbs 2. So the knowledge of God cannot be separated from the law of God, but it is attainable. But you still have to work for it. There are verbs of action employed here in Proverbs when we're pursuing truth, when we're looking at what God is doing. So it's attainable and it is valuable. I just mentioned two examples. When we turn away from evil, we are wise. And that's a valuable thing to do. Because if we don't, then we run into sin, and sin weakens us. If we read, again, not just Proverbs, read Ecclesiastes, Solomon is clear to show that sin weakens us, where wisdom strengthens us. And again, it has to start with the fear of the Lord. And of course, the fear of the Lord then ultimately leads to true heroism. And I say that because in chapter 31 of Proverbs, you have this example of the woman who fears the Lord. Now what's interesting, when you read about the woman who fears the Lord, if you read again the verbs that describe her are military terms. Why is Lemuel here, King Lemuel, using military terms to describe the woman who fears the Lord? Well, the conclusion is this: true heroism is domestic. True heroism is domestic, and it's only possible because of the fear of the Lord. What's the main characteristic of this woman is that she fears the Lord. And she does all these things. So true heroism, remember, true heroism is domestic. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So maybe you guys might want to write that down and use it for Valentine's Day. I don't know. That might be good. See, I told you it's practical. Okay. If you have questions as I go along, maybe write them down, and then when we have time at the end we can talk about it. I mean, obviously, I'm just scratching the surface of these as I go along. The second topic is the wise are faithful, and here's what I was talking about as far as these charts that Logos generates by literally one click. It's amazing. And then it shows you the Hebrew word emet in this case. And notice please how many ways it can be translated. Truth, truthful, faith, faithful, and then true, security, sure, truly, right, trustworthy, what is true, assured. So in Logos, if you click in, for example, on the blue, then it's going to tell you all the verses where it appears like that. Or if you click on the orange, it's going to tell you that. By the way, in Hebrew, this word, because it's translated also truthful and faithful, actually I have 2 chapters on this. Because this chapter is on the wise are faithful, but a lot of times it refers to the idea of being truthful, speaking truth. So I treat that in a separate chapter. But it's Logos has come a long way since the beginning. I remember when I was in seminary, I had a choice between Logos and Bible Works. And I chose Bible Works because Bible Works was the program for that. Logos was really bad, I remember, because I tried it. But now, Bible Works is no more. But Logos is really doing well. So if you're a pastor and don't have it, by the way, they're not paying me anything to say this. But Logos is a really good tool. And I use it in sermon preparation, all the commentaries they have present. It's really a really great topic. So when you look in the idea of being faithful, again, the word emet is translated faithful, and the first time it appears, among the first times it appears when it describes God. It describes God's character, and in Genesis and in Exodus it's translated faithfulness. It describes God's character as Him being gracious and faithful. So sometimes it's used of God. Moses reminds the new generation that will enter the promised land that God is faithful. So sometimes the word it refers to God, but then it's also used of humans. Abraham's servant in Genesis 24 is asking for steadfast love and faithfulness from Laban as he's looking for a wife for Abraham. On his deathbed, Jacob asks Joseph to deal with him based on steadfast love and emet and faithfulness, which is again very important. But what we have sometimes in Proverbs is that idea of love and faithfulness being combined. So those appear a lot together. Chesed, steadfast love, and emet, faithfulness. They appear together. Proverbs 20 verse 6 tells us that being faithful, by the way, is not the norm. The rhetorical question, a faithful man who can find, tells us that faithfulness is a rare characteristic in fallen humans. It is only through God's grace that we can be faithful. And the wise, that's why the wise, because they are faithful, are also trustworthy. For example, employees depend on faithful workers. And faithful workers are faithful and they are trustworthy if they are faithful. Proverbs 13:17, a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful envoy brings healing. A faithful witness, by the way, does not lie. So this is where that idea of truth and faithfulness come together. And again, the Proverbs is clear about that. A faithful witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies. a false witness. Proverbs teaches us in chapter 6 and then chapter 25, a false witness creates division. You guys are pastors, I don't have to tell you that, right? Can division in a church appear because someone says something that was not true? Don't raise your hands. I know if you're a pastor for half a day, you know that. You know that. But a false witness creates division and creates hurt. Proverbs 25:18. But by speaking truth, the wise mends and heals. Sometimes we might not see how that happens, but speaking truth, the Bible says it's healing. And again, we might not see it right away, but the Bible says it is so. Like a cold snow in time of harvest, a faithful messenger refreshes the soul of his masters. Proverbs 25:13. Again, living in an agrarian society, they knew what it means to be faithful. Now, if you look in Proverbs 5, 6, and 7, and if you ever preach through Proverbs 5, 6, and 7, you know that the main topic is faithfulness. But here it's talking about purity. It's talking about warning against adultery. Very practical warnings to this young man to keep away, as Proverbs say, from the lips of the forbidden woman. Sometimes she's described as the adulteress or the foreign woman, or different terms that are used here for this woman. The wise man is faithful and does not commit adultery, does not commit fornication or other biblical words that describe sexual sin. So this is probably one of the few parts in Proverbs that you could probably preach verse by verse. 5, 6, and 7, if you preach them together, that probably goes well. Because most of the, again, this is a commentary that we did not do verse by verse, but we had to divide into topics because Proverbs is, in my humble but correct opinion, impossible to preach verse by verse, because you have so many topics that are addressed, and that's why we decided to divide them into topics. And I prefer preaching through books, by the way. Right now I'm preaching through Genesis, and I love it. But there are some times when you need to stop and preach topically, and Proverbs is a good example of that. But if you still want to do verse by verse, 5, 6, and 7 in Proverbs is probably a good idea. It preaches great to young and old alike. But the key thing there is faithfulness. Are you faithful to God and His Word and His law? Or if not, then you are a fool and you give in to the, as the proverb says here, the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes, for the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. Verse 32, he who commits adultery lacks sense. Remember, there's the wise and then there's the fool. And here Solomon is trying to warn the young men, all of us, against that, and to be faithful. The wise are faithful, and that faithfulness is shown in purity. So the fear of the Lord, the wise are faithful, and then books can be written about parenting, right? Well, actually, books have been written about parenting. But Proverbs speaks a whole lot about parenting. And one of the main things we can do, sometimes we look at Proverbs just to see, okay, how can I raise my children? How can I discipline them or, teach them? But it's not just that. It's about knowing the identity of our children. And the book of Proverbs teaches us that our children are gifts from the Lord, right? And that's why we're supposed to raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord. But again, I start with Genesis when I talk about parenting. I start about Cain and Abel. What happens after the fall? You see what happens after the fall. Abel is killed by his brother Cain. In chapter 5, you have what? This person lived, so and so, and then he died, and then he died. It reads like a graveyard, doesn't it? And then he died, and then he died. And then you have chapter 6 through 9, the flood, and the consequences of that. So it's talking about the consequences of sin. When I go about the identity of our children, we got to go back to Genesis 1. Why are our children valuable? Because they are created in the image of God. You know, and we say that not just to our children, we say that to our students here at Grace. When I start the Christianity and critical thinking class, that's one of the first things I tell them. You guys are valuable because you are created in the image of God. You have intrinsic value. Because we have athletes, and sometimes the athletes are thinking that their value is in how many points they score. And I try to tell them from the beginning, it's not. That's not your value. Your value is being created in the image of God. Your value is not on what kind of grades you're getting. Because we have students who, if they don't get an A, there's trouble. You know what the trouble in them? And I'm telling them, your value is not in your grades. Your value is in the fact that you are created in the image of God. So we have to start that with our children first and foremost, and then Psalm 127 helps us. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of a womb is a reward. We should never tell children that they were an accident. Have you ever heard parents doing that? Oh, they were oops babies. Like what? There's no such thing. Children are a blessing from the Lord. They're a gift from the Lord. If you want to call them anything, call them what they really are. Passion babies. Right? Or whatever you want to call them. But there's no such thing as an illegitimate child. There are illegitimate parents, but no child is illegitimate. Never call the child illegitimate. They are a gift from the Lord. Again, there are illegitimate parents. Even Augustine, even though he lived a wild life, his mother was very godly. And she taught him how to live life, but he chose to lead a wild life and had a child out of wedlock. But you know what they named him? Adeodatus, which means gift from God. So even though he did what he did, he understood that the child is a gift from the Lord. And again, the identity of our children is very, very important. And then the beautiful thing about the Bible is that the fact that God gives us the Word of God as curriculum. And again, this starts all the way again in the law. You have that in Genesis, we have it in Exodus, even when we have the Passover being prepared. But most importantly, of course, you have Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my voice, my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children so. In other words, when we teach our children about God, we teach them His Word, but also we teach them what God has done for us. That's what God says to Moses. Make sure you tell your children how God has been there for you. Eugene Merrill writes, what is implied is that such an experience with the living God must be rooted and grounded in a historical event. an event that must be recalled and celebrated regularly and faithfully by all who participate and benefit from it. I mean, Good Friday is coming, right? And some of you will do communion on Good Friday, right? And some of you are doing communion like every, 3 months. Some of you are more godly, hopefully every month. Again, sometimes maybe we got to talk about that, about how do you guys decide when to have communion? And why don't we do it more often? Isn't it important? Didn't Jesus say something about that? Remember what I have done for you. But that's not why we're here today. But the parents are the teachers according to Scripture, and the Word of God is the curriculum. And Proverbs has a lot to say about parenting. First of all, wise parents discipline their children. I know this is not news for you, but children are not morally neutral. Can I get an amen? Children, according to David in Psalm 51 verse 4, children, and all of us, by the way, we are born in sin. My mother has conceived me, he says. In sin my mother has conceived me. So because of that, our children, we have to realize that our children are, just like all of us, are sinners in need of a Savior. From the beginning. From the beginning. I didn't have to teach my children how to sin. You know why? Because they would do it naturally. We know how that is. So because of that, they need to be disciplined when they do wrong. And I like what A.J. Ironside said. Family discipline should be patterned after the divine discipline of Hebrews 12. It is not love, but the lack of it that leaves the child to himself. To develop unchecked tendencies and propensities which shall result in future sorrow. Ours is a day of great laxity on this point. The coming generation will reap the bitter fruit of the absence of restraint and the evident aversion of chastening, so manifest in the majority of homes. A sickly sentimentality, supposedly wiser and more compassionate than God Himself, has made fashionable to decry the use of the rod as a relic of barbarous age. But the difference, the character of children and the home is certainly in the favor of Scripture, as anyone may see who will. Now, if you read Proverbs, the rod is not supposed to be punitive. And that's the problem. And we should never discipline our children in anger. And I think I was sometimes guilty of that. You cannot do it in anger. You have to wait and take a moment to calm down before you use the rod of discipline. But the Bible says, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Proverbs 29, 15. Wise parents affirm their children's abilities. You probably know that Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. It looks like that phrase, train up a child, that's the idea actually. You see how your child is bent and you're helping them in that direction. And again, you see that in the child. If he's inclined to be more creative and going the creative arts, then you encourage him doing that. Don't make him go into engineering. Or if he likes engineering, don't make him, do arts. That's the idea here with the training up part. See your ability, see the children's ability, and affirm them. Help them go in that direction. That's the idea with the train up a child in the way he should go. There is an illustration that I like very much when it comes to that. I heard it from Alistair Begg. You guys know Alistair Begg? I like listening to sermons, and I listen to Alistair Begg a lot. He's a pastor in Cleveland. You guys know Cleveland? The Mistake on the Lake. What, anybody from Cleveland? No, you're from Akron, right, Eric? Huh?
I got married in Cleveland. I don't want my wife to think it was a mistake on the lake.
But Alistair Begg tells the story when it tells a story about Benjamin West, who, by the way, was this famous painter who painted presidents, U.S. presidents, and tells a story when Benjamin West was just 6 years old, and he was left home with his cousin, who was, I think, 4. Sally was 4, and his mom said, "Hey, watch over Sally while I'm going to the store." So when she came back home, he had all this paint and this paper, and he was trying to do his paintings and painted little Sally, but in the process he made a big mess. And his mom came home to this mess, paint all over the place, but on a paper it was little Sally, like her portrait made by 6-year-old Benjamin. And his mom, instead of going ballistic, his mom kissed him on the forehead. And later Benjamin says, "My mother's kiss made me a painter." Wise parents affirm their children's abilities. Wise parents teach their children to avoid evil conduct. I know sometimes our children, maybe they're sick and tired of us telling them, don't. But it's our job. It's our job to do it. What probably we don't do very well is sometimes explaining why they shouldn't do it. And maybe that's what, sometimes it's good for us to tell them experiences from our own lives. Look, learn from my mistakes. And wise people learn from other people's mistakes, right? So it's okay to tell our children that we're not perfect. We made mistakes too. And you should avoid this, I didn't, but you can learn from me. By the way, Solomon does that a lot. Read Ecclesiastes. He gets to the end of his life and says, "Fear God and keep his commandments." Hey, I didn't do it, but you should. It's kind of that thing. So sometimes we have to learn from other people's mistakes. And wise parents teach their children to embrace godly contact. It's not just to tell them what not to do, but we got to tell them what to do. And again, that's important. Again, I come from a culture where we were not very much told why. We were just told, don't do it or do it, but not why. And I think that's why we need to learn to do that with our children and grandchildren. A good book on parenting is by Ted Tripp, who writes, "Fearing God and acquiring wisdom comes through the instrumentality of the rod. The child who is not submitting to parental authority is acting foolishly. He is rejecting the jurisdiction of God. He is living his life for the immediate gratification of his wants and desires. Ultimately, to refuse God's rule means to choose his own rule that leads to death. It is the height of foolishness." So, if you take a break from your preaching through whatever book you're doing, maybe you can do a series on parenting. And you can do it from the book of Proverbs, or you can do a biblical theology of parenting. There are a lot of ways to do it. And then the wise are generous. We talk about generosity. I know some of you only preach about money when there's a building campaign. Or you go to the book of Haggai, right? Oh, Haggai has something to say about that. Or if you're like some of my friends, when you get to preaching about money, you invite someone from the outside, like Dr. Cardoza. I said, "Hey, Dr. Cardoza is a good fundraiser, so we're going to invite him to talk about." I had churches like that. Did you do that, Knut? Okay, he never made mistakes. Yeah. Seriously, I had friends who, when it comes to preaching on giving, they invite people from the outside because they think, "Oh, the pastor should not preach on giving." Look, if you preach in the book of Genesis, you cannot avoid the topic of money. And the book of Proverbs is a whole lot. It says a lot about money and how to use money. And there should not be any topic in your church that you should not preach. If you're the pastor of that church, you are to feed the flock, and you cannot do supermarket theology. Just pick and choose what you want. That's why it's a beautiful thing to preach through books, because when it comes to the hard thing, it's right there. Nobody can accuse you, oh, see, you picked that to speak about me. No, it just came as I was preaching through the Bible. Same thing with Proverbs. You can go through Proverbs and, hey, I came across this. You know what? It's talking about generosity. And the verb used is chanan, which is a favor from where we have the word chen, grace, that appears a lot in the Old Testament. Grace is not a New Testament development. Grace originates in Genesis, actually, in Genesis chapter 3. So you see here how the word is used. It's used to, by the way, all these translations are from more literal versions like the ESV. Generous, merciful, gracious, pity. You have all these little use, but the idea is generosity. And when we look in the book of Proverbs, we see that the wise are generous because God cares for the poor. So why should we care for the poor? We should care for the poor because God cares for the poor. And again, the book of Proverbs is very, very important. You see, wise living means living wisely in relationship to those around us. Foolish living is just thinking about us. Thinking about others is wisdom. Whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. Proverbs 14:21. So this is where this word is translated generous, comes from that root chanan that we had earlier on. But again, it has a wide semantic range. So when you preach and teach, you can actually tell your congregation, look, this is how the word is translated. But it comes from a root that has a very wide semantic range. And in this case, it can mean to be gracious to have pity, to plead for grace. The idea is that it describes the beneficent actions that are freely offered for the well-being of another. The opposite of being generous is not stinginess, but hatred of neighbor. Think about that. The opposite in the book of Proverbs is not stinginess, but hatred. When you don't help the neighbor, you are not stingy, you actually hate him. And in Hebrew, the idea of hatred is actually the idea of rejection. You know, when it says, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated, the idea of that is more of I have rejected. It's not I have hated how we use it. It's I have rejected. The same thing it goes here. The wise, because God cares for the poor, the wise care for the poor. Proverbs 14:31. Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. And of course, we have that in the prophets as well. It says some very harsh words in Amos. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountains of Samaria, who oppress the poor and crush the needy. I mean, when was the last time you preached out of Amos 4:1 and called your people cows of Bashan? Well, that's what the prophet does. Why? Because back then, to be honored was the same word for to be fat, F-A-T. F-A-T and P-H-A-T were the same word. So seriously, in that time, you were stealing food from the poor, and you yourself were becoming fat, and then the poor were skinny. So that's why the image of the cows of Bashan, because They know what a fat cow looked like. But obviously, I'm not saying that you should do that today because you probably love your job, right? Yeah. But God responds with woe language against people who oppress the poor. He says, woe to those who are at ease in Zion, who feel secure on the mountain of Samaria, who lie on beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on their couches, and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who drink wine in bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. There are very harsh words that God has for people who don't care for the poor and the needy. So again, it's a practical thing. We have to ask ourselves personally, how much of my income does it go to the poor? You can ask yourself as churches, what percentage of your budget goes to the poor? Again, it's probably another topic at some other time, but the wise care for the poor. I noticed here in America, when I came to America, that the church has done something very interesting. The church has given the task of caring for the poor to the government. We let the government take care of the poor. But the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says it's the church's responsibility, right? It's our responsibility to take care of the poor and the needy. Think about how many churches are in this area. If all the churches would take care of the poor and the needy in their area, there would be no poor and needy. But we have given that task to the government, unfortunately. The Bible does say that God rewards the generous. Again, Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for the deed. By the way, we're not told how, and this should not be our motivation. Our motivation should be the love for neighbor. But I like, again, A.J. Ironside, who expounds on the relationship between God and the poor, and I quote, "It is truly precious to contemplate Jehovah as the patron of the poor. He has left such in the world to test the hearts of those who are better provided for, and He accepts what is done with compassion to relieve the needy, and so much done for Himself. Money and goods bestowed with loving pity on those in distress are not gone forever. He takes note of every mite and makes Himself responsible to see that all shall be repaid. Genuine philanthropy is the result of true love of God." The wise are generous. The wise are humble. Humility is a topic that we always have to cover personally, and we always have to do self-assessments. And whenever you think you have reached humility, then you make sure you know that you don't have it. That's so never say you have arrived, because when you think you have arrived, you don't have it. So it's always something that we are striving for. The main verb used for this, that the noun derives from the verb ana, to be wretched, emaciated, cringe, humble. As you can see, it's translated humble, sometimes afflicted. Again, it's translated different ways. Again, a very wide semantic range. But the verb root means to bend over under pressure of circumstances, and consequently, as affliction does its proper work, then the person becomes humble. Dumbrell defines humility in wisdom literature as, and I quote, "the human recognition of one's own inadequacy when faced with the evidence for creation and providence." Humility is finally defined not in terms of lowliness, but in terms of selflessness, and is an essential root of all wisdom. And in Proverbs, we see a lot how God stands against the proud and humility is rewarded. And you have that in the Old Testament, and a lot of examples. And you know, the example of Saul is a clear one, right? And God tells him, look, when you were little in your own eyes, everything was great. But when you became proud, that's when the downhill began. And it is a topic that I struggle with all the time. And one book that helped me is this book by Jerry Bridges called Respectable Sins. If you do not have it, I highly encourage you to read it. We have mentoring groups here at Grace. Each faculty member in the seminary has a mentoring group. And when I start with them, we go through Humility first. Humility by Andrew Murray. That's the book. When people ask me, what's one book we should read apart from the Bible? I always tell them, Humility by Andrew Murray. That's the first one. And then The Pursuit of Holiness by Jerry Bridges, another book that was very instrumental in my life in college. And then Jerry Bridges wrote this towards the end of his life, Respectable Sins. And this is a book that really God used to show me certain things in my heart. And he talks about the pride of correct doctrine and the pride of achievement. Obviously, we're a Christian college, and we have to hold fast to our doctrine, right? But there's a difference between holding fast to the doctrine and being proud of that, and or thinking that, man, I'm the only one who knows the truth on that one. Especially when we know there are things where we can disagree. And I'm thinking especially, for example, the covenant versus dispensational differences when it comes to, let's say, end times. I mean, how silly would it be for me to land on something very hard and to say, oh, if you don't believe like me, then you're a heretic. Because there are so many things that, again, we can be evangelical Christians, but there can be differences and nuances in certain areas. And I had to fight this a lot, and I still am, because again, we like Grace College and Seminary, and we believe that this is the Word of God without error. But we have to be very humble when it comes to certain things that we hold to. And the second one is the pride of achievement. God allows us to do certain things, and then we can fall into the temptation to be proud about it, when actually the Bible says, well, what do you have that you didn't get from God? Nothing. There are no reasons why I should be proud of any achievement. Why? Because God has given that to me. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance and the way of evil, and perverted speech. You know what God says about that? I hate. God doesn't say I tolerate, I hate. See, God doesn't just tell us, hey, you shouldn't be proud. He said, I hate pride. I hate it. And a lot of what happens in Proverbs is not necessarily talk about humility, but talk about against pride. Because most people can relate to that. Right? All of us can relate to that. But pride is what leads the scoffer to be arrogant, Proverbs 21:24. And it is the same pride that will deceive one to feel safe until the Lord brings him down. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. And I know we use a lot that word, a lot of those verses, but before we use them for other people, we should probably use them for ourselves. Again, to do a self-evaluation. And then when we move on and we get to the word emet again, remember I told you emet can mean faithful, and we're using that for the wise are faithful chapter, but we have to come back and do a chapter on the wise speak truth. Because speaking truth, and it's related to the next chapter, speaking kindly, are very much a part of Proverbs. A wise person speaks truth. There is no instance in Scripture when the Bible allows for us to lie or to deceive. This morning I was teaching Christianity and critical thinking to students, and Immanuel Kant was the one who said, God is the moral legislator who puts these laws within us. And, two things fill my mind with wonder. He said, the starry heavens above and the moral law within. And he said the moral law that's in us never allows you to lie. Never. You always are supposed to tell the truth. Speak truth. And again, back to emet. It can mean faithful, but it can also mean truth. And that's why we have to look at this idea. A lying tongue is Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. So see here, the word emet is used, but it's translated faithfully, but it's contrasted to the lying lips. And by the way, when we talk about lying, it's not just don't lie to other people. Don't lie to yourself. And sometimes we have thoughts that come into our minds. And I learned this, by the way, from Jim Brown. I remember Jim Brown speaking one time, and he said, sometimes words come into our, thoughts come into our head, right? And what does Satan do a lot of times? He lies to us, doesn't he? And he lies to us, and we have these thoughts that are wrong. So Jim Brown said, don't listen to yourself. Speak truth to yourself. So when Satan is lying to you, you got to open the Bible and speak truth to yourself. Read the Bible out loud. That's God's truth. Don't listen to yourself. Speak truth to yourself. And the same thing goes here. Why speak truth? Not just to other people, but to ourselves. Let's not lie to ourselves. If we're here spiritually, let's not say we're here. Or even if we're here, let's not say we're here. So again, that self-evaluation, that self-appraisal needs to go on all the time when it comes to speaking truth to ourselves and truth to each other. And of course, you are leaders. And truth and truth-telling are crucial in leadership. Steadfast love and truth preserve the king, and by steadfast love his throne is upheld. Again, this idea where chesed and emet are together. The steadfast love and truth. Notice they are again together. Steadfast love and truth preserve the king, and by steadfast love his throne is upheld. The lies that we tell, especially in leadership, are like those faults in California. When I came to the States, we lived in California. And apparently there are earthquakes there. But you know why there are earthquakes? Because in the ground there are faults. These faults, the San Andreas fault, And it's funny because I came to the States in 86, and in 87 there was the big one. It was a big earthquake. I was coming out of my room and the TV fell on the floor as I was trying to get to the door. That's how they teach you, to stand in the door. But those earthquakes happen because there are those little faults in the ground. And in leadership, those lies are little faults that produce big earthquakes. So as leaders in churches, you as pastors especially, you should always speak truth. The challenge is this: speaking the truth in love. That's the challenge. And the challenge is not just in church. The challenge is here at Grace as well. We have to speak the truth in love, because not everybody necessarily agrees with us. But very, very important concepts. The wise pass on counsel and knowledge, and makes others know what is right and true, so you may give a true answer. An honest answer is compared to a kiss on the lips, Proverbs 24, 26. A lying tongue hates its victims. Again, it's not the fact that you're lying and you don't like the person. According to Proverbs, you're hating the person if you're lying to them. So truth has to become imperative in one's life. Two things I ask of you, Agur says in chapter 30. Deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Crucial in personal lives and in leadership. The wise speak kindly is the next to the last one. Again, one of the verses growing up that stayed with me was 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. A lot of times it's not what we say, but how we say it. You know that, right? It's not necessarily what we say, but how we say it. So we have to speak truth, but Proverbs also says we have to speak kindly. And by the way, that's not just in Proverbs, it's all throughout the Bible. The Hebrew expression reads like this: to speak to the heart or to speak upon the heart, and that expression is translated to speak kindly. But I like the Hebrew expression because it involves the heart. You probably heard speak the heart language of someone, right? People like to listen to their Bible read in their heart language, right? Meaning their original language that they knew growing up. So again, the challenge is not that we don't know truth, is that we need to speak the truth in love and kindly. I think that's the greatest challenge that we have. The expression that this appears in the Ruth narrative, where it's used by Ruth to describe how Boaz spoke to her. I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken to the heart. That's literally the expression. It's translated in our Bibles. You have spoken kindly. After David mourns for Absalom, he's encouraged to speak to the heart of the servants. Again, to speak kindly to them. Why do we need to speak kindly? We need to speak kindly because words have power. The tongue of the wise bring healing. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good or kind word makes him glad. The word there can be translated both good or kind. A man who is kind benefits himself, but a cruel man hurts himself. He who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king as his friend. And we can go on and on. But words have power, and kind words are sweet. Gracious words are like honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and healthy to the body. Did you ever think that your words can actually give health to someone? One time when I was interim pastor in Kalamazoo, I was complaining that I was losing my voice. Like, I lost my voice again, And a lady comes to me afterwards and says, you got to stop yelling at your kids. Like, how did you know I'm yelling at my kids? I don't know if she experienced it, but you know what? I thought about it, and she was right. I was losing my voice because I was yelling too much. But she said that to me in kindness. You remember, Nick? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. Yeah, don't answer that. Thank you. But it's funny how wise people around us see something that we don't see. But again, she was very kind in the way she said it, and it made me think about it, and that she was right. Did you ever have people in your life that gently and kindly tell you things? I remember to this day a brother in church pulling us aside, a couple of us. We were late for a meeting. We were in a mission trip in Romania with the men's choir, and the whole choir missed the train connection because we were late, about 3 or 4 of us. And an elder from the church pulled us aside and rebuked us, but I can tell you in kindness. But I can tell you one thing, ever since that day, I hated being late. Because there was someone who cared enough to tell me the truth, enough to speak kindly to me. The other one was a lady in my church. I was about, I think, 19. She came to me and said that, Tiberius, you have bitterness in your heart. I'm like, what? Me? I was just saying, me bitterness? And then I stopped and I thought about it, and it was true. Like if someone said something, I had an answer right away. You know, and that's why, by the way, sometimes bitterness looks like you have an answer to anything or everything, and you're smarter than everybody else in the room, and like, oh. And you know, I thought about it, and I realized that lady loved me enough to tell me the truth in love, and it changed me. Again, it made me to self-reflect and to change. Lastly, the wise are lifelong learners. Hey, the fact that you are here actually proves this point. The fact that Newt has been doing this Pastorpedia for so many years proves that he's a lifelong learner. He's not just a lifelong leader, but he's a lifelong learner. And when I grow up, I want to be like you, except the ping pong part. Again, I want to close with this. I found a good illustration for this from church history. This is from Martin Luther, the great German theologian. He said, "I did not learn my theology all at once, but I had to search deeper for it where my temptations took me, not understanding, reading, or speculation, but living, nay, dying and being damned, make a theologian." Never be content with what you know. Ask God to give you a love for learning. And that's the beautiful thing about the Old Testament. As I said, it's so big. The more I read it, the more I know I realize how little I know. So there will never be a time when I cannot learn more.